we have to work with the department sort of as we can and get information. EDD is working in partnership with the California Cybersecurity Integration Center to use digital forensics to identify fraudulent actors and further prevent their intrusion into our system. And then finally, we have been participating in the National Association of State Workforce Agencies Identity Hub and utilize their forensic tools and identity schemes. Oh, let me have a drink of water. And then also, around policy changes, we eliminated the automatic backdating of PUA claims. And that was in early September, and we saw a decrease in our PUA claims by about 72% since then. We also suspended suspicious high-volume multiple claims filed at the same address. So then my last slide, I wanted to talk about making sure claimants access to benefits. One thing right off the bat that's not on this slide that I want to mention, because this is new, I did put in a request to Bank of America requesting that they waive the $10 fee to expedite debit cards. I think that's something I heard through the legislature as well, and I think it might have come up in the strike team. I did put through that request. B of A has responded, and they have agreed to waive the $10 fee to expedite, and they will be refunding people's money back to April 1st. So I think that's some very good news. And then also, EDD and Bank of America, we noticed a very high, unusually high volume of claims associated with the single addresses, and as well as some other fraud indicators. As a result, approximately 693 claims were temporarily suspended. EDD and Bank of America are coordinating additional review of almost 358,000 debit cards that have been issued and payments received. EDD is also reviewing 315,000 claims that have not received a payment, and people are going through the identity verification process. Now, right now, as we speak, the EDD and the Labor Agency is currently meeting with the Bank of America to work through many of these concerns and issues and the best way to move forward to ensure we're fighting fraud, but at the same time, we want to make sure we're getting that money in the hands of our claimants as soon as possible. That is our priority. We also, EDD contacted all the customers associated with these claims, asking for documents to help EDD verify identity. EDD will continue to follow up with emails, texts, and phone calls to help reestablish payment quickly for our legitimate claimants. The EDD received documents from 29,000 people, and the department is utilizing all means available to expedite the review, and we hope to have resolution over the next 5 to 7 days. For the remaining claimants that did not provide us documents at all, the EDD is reaching out again through email, text, and outbound calls just to make sure we touch everybody, and if they need to file for benefits, they have the opportunity. Moving forward, the EDD believes the implementation of our IDD-Me verification technology, which launched Monday at our front-end process, will really move to help quickly authenticate legitimate claimants and help the EDD with processing their claims faster. It will also mitigate fraud activity from recurring in the future. So hopefully, moving forward, this won't be a concern. At this point, we just got to make sure the claims that we still need to process are people that are eligible are the ones that are getting paid. So that's the update that I brought today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Alamo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Excellent. Chaz Alamo with the Legislative Analyst Office. Our office produced a brief handout for the hearing that's available on the subcommittee's website. And we were asked by staff to provide our assessment of the strike team report and recommendations, and also any recommendations we had as to how the legislature might continue oversight over improvements at the Employment Development Department. Both Secretary Richardson and Director Hilliard provided a thorough background, so I'll begin on my second page of the handout having to do with our perspective of the strike team report. In our assessment, the report is clear, it's exhaustive, and it's critical of the delays and backlog at EDD since the pandemic began. The report's findings are generally consistent with our office's understanding of what's led to the backlog and delay. And throughout the report, we've identified sort of three recurring themes that we want to speak to today. One, that a longstanding institutional focus on fraud prevention during the pandemic provided little benefit and at great cost. Two, that veteran staff have been hampered by a perfect storm of sorts, made up from the requirement for many staff to do work remotely, the sudden surge in UI claims to such an unprecedented level, and also the requirement to train new hires at EDD. And third, contrary to a common narrative, the strike team report identifies that the backlog is due in many ways, first and foremost, to operational policies or challenges, as well as policies the department has made in the past, rather than the department's reliance on an outdated technology system. Going forward, the report's recommendations seem logical, and that the state's true task now is to ensure the implementation of those recommendations going forward. So the first perspective having to do with the EDD's longstanding institutional focus on fraud providing little benefit during the pandemic. As a result of this focus, which is largely in response to federal requirements that set targets for overpayments, EDD has scrutinized roughly 40% of incoming UI applications for identity verification since the pandemic began. And during low workload times, this manual review process is doable by the department, but during high workload times like we've seen this last year, the claims that go through the manual review process ultimately arrive in a bottleneck that we've seen in the last several months. And unfortunately, according to the strike team, the manual review process, in fact, did not capture a meaningful number of fraudulent claims as it had intended. In fact, the strike team found that of each 500 claims that EDD staffed for manual identity verification, one fraudulent claim was captured. The second theme that we wanted to focus on is, again, about this perfect storm, and that is that the most experienced staff at EDD have been hampered in their work by a requirement to work remotely, by the surge in new claims, and by training new hires. EDD has hired more than 5,000 new staff since the pandemic began, and experienced staff have been asked to help onboard and train these staffers. And in doing so have been diverted from answering phone calls and working down the backlog of manual claims that both the secretary and director mentioned. In addition, they've had to work remotely, and as we all know, this can have productivity effects. As one example, in the strike team report, one common process step called recomputations, the strike team found took 2 to 5 times longer now than it did before the pandemic as a result of this perfect storm. Our third sort of recurring theme that we've identified has to do with the causes, or the primary causes of the delayed payments and current backlog. And without question, EDD's reliance on outdated technology has hindered their ability to make quick program changes, and it's led the department to rely on workarounds and a time-intensive manual process. But as identified in the strike team report, the large backlog and broad frustration felt by workers can also be linked to inefficient operational policies, as well as policy determinations made by the department in the past, and specifically the department's focus on fraud prevention. Some of the key policies identified by the strike team report that led to some of this backlog that aren't necessarily technological in nature revolve around the call center staffing and limitations of the call center, the management of multiple claims that come in and reconciling multiple claims into a single claim, the limitations for outbound communications historically for EDD staff, as well as document scanning and other internal process steps. Sort of transitioning, our office has made sort of one broad recommendation for legislative oversight and two specific recommendations. So first, the responsibility of carrying out these urgent and largely sort of administrative tasks that were part of recommendations in the strike team report falls on the administration at this point. These tasks are taking place now, as both the secretary and the director mentioned, and that tends to limit the legislature's oversight given the urgency of some of these items. But there are also broader recommendations throughout the report, as well as some sensitive findings that we believe warrant the legislature's attention at this time. A couple of findings that we would highlight have to do with accessibility. So the strike team identified that the EDD UI online system may not be accessible for individuals with disabilities, that it was also challenging for individuals to communicate or contact EDD if English was not their primary language. And additionally, some major recommendations that we believe warrant legislative attention at this time include the major recommendation to restart the Benefit Systems Modernization Project, the EDD's major IT upgrade, as well as the recommendations overall that the department sort of look through its existing user experience, so forms, requirements, as well as eligibility certification requirements, and improve those such that workers applying for benefits would be faced with fewer confusion, or less confusion, I should say. And regarding our specific recommendations, the secretary and the director mentioned both of these, and so we would reiterate. Because the strike team report includes so many recommendations, 111, as the director mentioned, we recommend that the administration maintain a process or project tracker with each recommendation, just a table, and alongside the recommendation, sort of a status of where the department is in implementing that recommendation, and alongside that, when the department expects to implement that recommendation. The report is thorough and lengthy, and having a short, brief document of this kind would help staff and members follow along as EDD sets about these improvements and be able to identify maybe problem areas where the legislature's involvement is warranted. And finally, as Secretary Richardson mentioned, the Department of Technology and the Office of Digital Innovation are intending to maintain involvement with EDD and help guide some of their technological improvements. But as we understand it, GovOps agency itself is no longer directly involved in the implementation of the strike team recommendations. And given our assessment that many, if not most, of the causes of the backlog and delay were operational in nature rather than technological, we would recommend that the legislature request that GovOps remain closely involved with the project and provide operational guidance, at least until EDD has eliminated the backlog. Thank you. Happy to take any questions at your convenience.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Alamo. You talked about operational shortcomings, and that's nothing new to EDD. These have gone on for quite some time through different changes of leadership. Is that correct?
I think I would characterize it as some of the operational shortcomings that, in EDD's defense, don't necessarily appear as shortcomings when workload is low because they're manageable. But I do believe that some of these same issues arose during the Great Recession more than 10 years ago that we're seeing now during the pandemic. So yes, sir.
And then you talk about the focus on fraud. Is it true that a lot of that focus is mandated by the federal government, not so much California policies?
That's true, sir. The UI program is a state-federal partnership. The state receives federal funding, and with that federal funding, the federal government sets performance standards. Now, they set standards on overpayments, which is the fraud standard we're talking here, but they also set standards on benefit timeliness. In the opinion of the strike team report, in some of their findings, they point out that the state had tended to emphasize the federal requirements about fraud more so than they've emphasized the federal requirements about benefit payment timeliness. And the point we would raise is, at this point during a pandemic, given the economic circumstances, that balance may have been a challenge for EDD in addressing its backlog, given its historical focus on that fraud prevention measure.
But regardless, these are both federal mandates, correct?
They are, yes.
Okay, so I just want to make it clear that it's not something that California is doing of its own volition. It's mandated by the federal government.
I think that's a fair characterization, sir. The mandates themselves are performance targets. So the federal government provides some guidance on how we should go about meeting those targets, but doesn't necessarily prescribe exactly how we would do so. One instance is that it may well be the case the state could have reached its overpayment federal target by using a different strategy for verifying claims. The ID.me tool is certainly one example that the state could have instituted several years ago to prevent some of the manual verification process backlog from accumulating.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for Ms. Hilliard. I know you talked about clean claims and the EDD reset. I know you've done some caseloads, but it went down from 1.6 million to 1.3 million, so not a big dent in that. And I guess my question for you is, we're just starting in October, so you're saying that you won't liquidate the backlog until January of 2021. Can you tell me why it's going to take that long to do that?
Yes, you're correct. It's going to take that long because that's the work is very complex and complicated, and we have X number of professional staff that are skilled and trained in those areas, even though we have redirected folks as recommended in the strike force, in the strike team report, to ensure our most experienced people are on the most complex tasks, and our least experienced people are on the least complex tasks until such time we have an opportunity to train them. So we're utilizing all viable resources in a very systematic way to ensure that we're hitting the backlog quickly and drilling it down as fast as we can, as well as looking at maintaining the inventory that's coming in. So once we do clear the backlog, we do believe we'll be in good shape moving forward to, assuming there's another pandemic or some other unknown thing comes along.
So as far as the backlog goes, what is the oldest case you have? Is it been like several months out there, and they may face into November, December? What's the average wait time on these cases?
It just depends on what the situation and where they're, I guess, stuck in the process. But we do have claims as old as in June. Most of them are June, July, August, the older ones.
So you're talking June, July, August, September, October, and those claims are still pending out there? I mean, that's 5 months, 5 or 6 months already?
Yes.
That's very lengthy. Regarding your investigations with CDCR, obviously you're getting the inmates list. There's not one, but we see a lot of folks in county jail, inmates here in Sacramento County, that have racked up $10,000 or $12,000 using the state-issued or county-issued iPads to do these claims. How many investigators do you have in EDD?
We have 27 investigators from an EDD for these criminal fraud activities. The CDCR, it is very more after the fact, because unfortunately they don't have a list that we can cross-match it at the very get-go. But we are working with them to do what we can to identify any criminal activity that's going on. Unfortunately, with the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, there really isn't any. It has such lenient rules that if they utilize their own name and social security number and, fraudulently say they're not incarcerated, it's very hard to detect unless we know they were actually incarcerated at some time. And we only know that if CDCR is able to give us the information we need.
So there's no way you would know if someone's doing it in the county jail, because most folks aren't going back to state prison these days. I think it's interesting because the county here in Sacramento County, when folks went into custody, a lot of them were receiving general assistance, and they were able to talk with the sheriff's department that once those folks went into custody, they stopped getting general assistance, and that was deemed to be very effective with that. Are you guys working on a plan to talk to the counties?
At this point, we've been working with Department of Labor and CDCR, more on that level. We've been focusing on that at this point. But certainly our hope is to work with the counties.
Sure. So since you have 27 investigators, that's statewide in a state of 40 million people?
I know.
Okay, most of this falls on to local law enforcement that does it. And I'm going to point out, I ran a high-tech crimes task force for the Central Valley that targeted this type of action for 3 years. And I just to my colleagues, there's been no increase in funding since 2011. So 9 years, it hasn't increased at all, and it's barely $2 million to deal with this and investigate it. And they have the ability to do that. So I think that's something that we have to look at. So real quick on the ID Me, is that using facial recognition?
I know they're cross-matching with different credit reports, telephone bills, different household facility bills. They're also looking at the picture of the IDs.
But on that,
I can't say I know the intricate workings of it, but
right. But on,
I also did provide you all a handout. I hope just for your information on ID Me that they provided me to talk about their.
We got that. I guess my question on that is, with ID Me, there's holograms that we have on our state-issued IDs, and someone taking a picture of that, you can't look at those holograms and those labels to tell on that. So I'm curious about how you validate that, because it's very easy to produce a fake ID and then send a picture in. So unless you're using that, I'm just wondering about that.
Personally, I don't know, but we certainly could talk to ID Me and let you know.
And then as far as DMV goes, obviously most people in the state have a driver's license or ID. How's that working with DMV? You have access to their full, library?
We've been using a cross-match with DMV and the Social Security for many years now. That has been sort of our main method of identity proofing.
But not photographs up until now. It's just the fact that you have an ID.
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you, does EDD need more access to the DMV photos? Would that make the job easier?
Well, I believe ID Me that company is who we're contracting with in order to do the identity proofing. So I think that is addressing the main concern of who, that we're actually doing business with the person that's.
But a lot of that information they get is easily obtainable on the dark web, where most of these folks are on the dark web and getting someone's name, social security number, address. I mean, they have your whole profile. So someone would have access to that information if asked and quizzed on that. That's readily available right now. So I'm trying to reconcile that fact and then with the ID and them taking the photograph of themselves.
Right. Secretary Richardson, I don't know if Amy Tong is available to talk about ID Me, because she's played an instrumental role in the implementation and probably could speak to it much better than me.
Yes, hi. Hello, Chair and members of the committee. This is Amy Tong, State Chief Information Officer, and I can pick up, perhaps address some of the question that was raised by Member Cooper. Specifically, I'll go reverse order, Member Cooper, specifically to the information that is a comparison with the DMV, because DMV in their real ID process are using same technology, ID Me, through a document verification process. So the intent is that after this initial implementation of ID Me, specifically with EDD, we will be looking at whether there's further efficiency that can be gained by EDD and DMV working together to process those identity verification faster. One thing I do like to note for the individual that have already signed up with an ID.me account through the DMV process, they do not need to recreate those accounts and can be automatically logged in using that same account over the EDD. So that therefore, in the early results we have seen since its implementation, there's actually over 25% of individuals who are applying to EDD right now are using the existing ID.me account. And Member Cooper, to your earlier question about whether ID.me is considered a facial or using facial recognition, and again, this would be a question better addressed by ID.me directly, but from the experience that we have applied in this is not a facial recognition type of verification. It's actually using information such as the individual's driver's license, and I've actually personally gone through that process as one of the beta tester, and there's question asked about your financial data and use those as background information to verify. And there's other registration information if you use using a phone, or is the phone registered to you, et cetera, et cetera. So there's multiple algorithms that are used before anything that are facial recognition even being applied.
But all those items are available on the dark web too. Every item you just mentioned is available on the dark web because that information has been captured through data breaches over the years.
Right, so I want to separate it out. So I'm also very much as one of the co-lead of the California Cybersecurity Integration Center that are engaged with EDD on a separate effort to looking at the fraud aspect. I wanted to separate out the information on the dark web, as you might have read, is identity that has already been stolen, or identity that is accounts that are created with EDD and further to be sold on the dark web. For those identities that have been stolen, they would have a difficulty going through the ID.me verification process, because for the individual who needs to be verified, you would need to know more than one component of that identity. In other words, not just your driver's license number, it's your driver's license plus something similar to, like, what is your mortgage company? And things like that are not something that personally can be bought through from a driver's license information perspective. So there's that multi-factor verification process involved.
Thank you. Mr. Chu?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just start with the good news about this report. This is an important and critical document. I really want to give kudos to our Cabinet Secretary of GovOps as well as Ms. Palka. The strike team deserves a lot of credit for taking on this very difficult task of analyzing how to turn around an agency that has been broken for years. I also want to just take a moment and thank the many members of the rank and file of EDD for all their work during this time period. What I will say about this report is it says what many of us in the legislature have been saying for months in a bipartisan way. This report documents in excruciating detail how EDD has failed California in every imaginable way, how broken this agency has been. In the 109 pages of this report with over 100 recommendations, it provides a roadmap. And my hope is we are at the lowest point of this agency, at a time when our constituents have gone into extreme debt, depleted their life savings, and are having trouble paying for rent and putting food on the table. I have a number of comments and questions. Let me just start first with a comment around the backlog. To Director Hilliard, as we've discussed at prior hearings, we were never able to get an upfront answer from you about the size of the backlog. At a meeting with many legislators, you answered a question by our budget chair, Mr. Ting, about the size of the backlog in July, where you said the backlog was 100,000, no few 100,000, no 100,000. Then toward a few weeks later, the administration told us the backlog was 1.1 million to be cleared by the end of September. And then when this report came out, late on a Saturday night, we learned that the backlog was 1.6 million claims to be cleared by the end of January. So my question is, given this history of challenges of understanding the size of the backlog and when it's going to be cleared, I hope you can understand we may lack some confidence in understanding, in believing that this is the size of the backlog and when it's going to get cleared. And I wanted to ask, are you fully confident that this is the size of the backlog and that it's going to be cleared by the end of January? Which, by the way, is a date that's obviously many months from now and a very challenging date for our constituents.
Yes, I understand that. Yes, I'm very confident that the way that we are looking at the backlog now shows a very total population. The way we were looking at it back in the spring, in the summer, was really based on workload of when people turned in items. Now we're looking at the recommendation of the strike team, more holistic. Not only we're looking at inventory of work that we have on our plate that we need to get done, but also we're looking at claims where our claimants have not responded to us, because we know that there's probably situations where they tried to work through us or get a hold of us and couldn't, and maybe still are out there. So we're including all of those people now as part of the backlog. It's much more inclusive. That's why it grew so much larger. But we wanted to make sure we were accounting for each and every person that could possibly be eligible for benefits and work through it. So we are feeling very good about the last 2 weeks and our burn down and what we were able to accomplish. We're on track. IDME is looking good. So at this point, barring any other new federal legislation or whatnot, we feel very confident and very good that we'll clear it in January.
Obviously, we'll be monitoring this in the coming months because, to be honest, it's very hard for us to tell our constituents that we have 100% certainty that this will get resolved in the next couple of months, given the track record. Now, I appreciate that you've expressed some pride in the implementation of IDME. I do have some questions just on the press release that we were provided in the last 12 hours. You said more than about 64% of individuals were able to verify their ID online through IDME. Prior to the implementation, you told the public that about 60% of applicants were able to automatically verify, or put another way, 40% were flagged for manual review, and that's what took so much time. So from what we can tell, it looks like we have gone from 60% automatic verification to 64% automatic verification, when you told us weeks ago that IDME would automatically verify over 91% of applicants. So has this tool met your expectations? It doesn't seem like that from the very numbers you've provided us.
Absolutely, it's performing as expected. As far as the complete 91% that we're going for, it's still too early to take a look at those numbers. We just started getting claims in, and they haven't run through all of our automated processes, even outside of IDME. So we don't really have any good metrics yet as far as what's being done through automatically. We do have metrics as far as how many people are getting through IDME and they're being validated and they're being cleared.
If I could just say, we were expecting automatic verification of 91%, and what we're seeing now is automatic verification of 64%. That's a really big difference, and I'm just going to leave that as a comment. Again, I'm not persuaded that this is actually moving things faster, but I hope to be, hope that we'll get more information. I want to talk for a moment about the dashboard and just make a comment about it. This legislature, led by our colleague, Assemblymember Daley, moved forward with budget trailer language and also with our chairman, AB 107, so that we could have a sense of tracking. And I have to say, I give EDD maybe a D when it comes to how you have shown your information. So you provide a dashboard that's very difficult for the public to find. It should be easily accessible on your website, but instead it's linked in a press release. It's in a PDF form, so it's impossible to compare week-to-week information. There are separate PDF forms for daily initial versus daily continued backlogs. It's confusing, it's hard to navigate, it's not transparent, it's not accountable. This is not the spirit of what we had asked you to do. Could you give some comment on the dashboard and how you ended up providing it to us this way?
In AB 107, it was very specific what data elements we were to provide, and that's exactly what we did. I certainly will go back. Thank you for your feedback, and I'll talk to my communications people to see if there's anything we could do to make it more user-friendly. But we were responding to exactly what the legislation had said. Now with our new dashboards, our hope is to reach out to the committee and sort of replace it with the new dashboard metrics as recommended by the strike team.
I would suggest that we can have another conversation about it, but I don't think the dashboard you've provided meets the spirit of what we were asking you to do. But that's a conversation for another day. I want to ask you a question around access and who gets to access your system. Are you familiar with how many Californians don't speak English at their home? Do you know what that number is?
No, I do not, sir.
It's about 40% of our state. And one of the things that this strike team report laid out is that individuals who don't speak English at home face insurmountable barriers when it comes to addressing EDD. We have heard from not just our constituents, but civil rights organizations who have been who've been reaching out to you on this. I have brought this up to your attention. In fact, in the report, I was pleased you actually copied language that I had provided to your office weeks ago, and I appreciate the plagiarism because in this case, it reflects the fact that your agency is at risk of violating our state language access law. And from what I can tell, there hasn't been any progress in addressing the needs of individuals for whom English is not their first language. I'd like to ask what's going on in that area. I'm hoping there's been progress, but according to the strike team report and according to the experience of our constituents, there has been none.
Language access is a vital area that we're always working towards. We do have a number of different avenues for people to work through. We have multiple languages on our phone line. We also have a service if people call and it's not a language we immediately have, we can bring people in to help with the translation. We continue to work on form changes and updates, and our application is in Spanish and English. I know that's, there's still many others in other languages, but we take that very seriously and we continue to work on it every day. It's just not a quick fix. It takes time and resources. But I totally concur. We need to do more in that arena. I will say with the pandemic, it's not specific to English or non-English speaking people. Everybody has had a struggle with it, as we all know, just because of the sheer masses and the sheer volumes. So yeah, it's not a good situation. I totally agree.
So if I could just respond to that, you've given that same answer for the last 6 months. We've asked you this question in many, many ways. We're told you guys are working on it. We're told that there are going to be improvements on the phone lines and the emails and the forms. None of us have seen it. We haven't seen any improvement in this area. And I'm at a point where when a civil rights organization brings this to my attention, I think we are on very dangerous ground here of violating the civil rights of our constituents. Let me just add a couple more points around challenges to access. So the report also lays out that Californians with disabilities are incredibly challenged in accessing this, and I think that number is between 10 to 15% of our state. And then the report also lays out that if you are a low-income person that doesn't have access to a computer, you're remarkably challenged. So if you add all this up between non-English speakers, Californians with disabilities, Californians without computers, that's at least over half of our state who represent some of our most vulnerable constituents who are challenged here. So I want to make that point. Modernization, I know this report called for a halt of the modernization efforts that had been an 11-year project, 3 years in the making. And I think it made sense to halt that report, but I am concerned of what the long-term plan is. And I'd like to ask Ms. Tong on the call, what is your perspective on what needs to happen once we clear the backlog of next steps of modernization? How can we use the best and brightest of our state when it comes to technology and innovators to really put this IT challenge behind us?
Yes, thank you, Subcommittee Member Chu, for that question. Happy to jump in here. Specifically to the BSM project, reference here, we are standing ready to work with EDD as soon as the backlog is clear. There are several items we're going to be focusing on. One is working with the Office of Digital Innovation, working with, from a process reengineering aspect, looking at the current operation and policy and procedure aspect of the EDD to take a look what improvement that can be made. So it's not necessarily applying technology to the existing process, but using technology as a way and as an enabler to streamline the process. And I believe LAO was also referencing this, that it's really that policy tech combination is what we need to look at modernization. Second to that, there are three modules, if you would, that were focused for the BSM. That is disability insurance, as well as paid family leave that's on top of unemployment insurance. And when the reassessment begins, needs to look at how are the prioritization of those modules would apply, and then specifically apply to the immediate needs on what EDD needs to improve on. And third item, most important, is that from a user input aspect, now that this pandemic have created, a tremendous experience that this would gain by EDD in terms of what the best way to serve those claimants or individuals need service from EDD, taking those input as they're driving the focus and the priority and how to streamline technology systems that are needed to provide those is going to be incredibly important. And with all of that, as you mentioned, Assemblymember Chu, that we have great asset in the state of California, and we do need to solicit input as well as innovative ideas from many of the firms in various in size, and that should be by design, so we can hear many different approaches in resolving this problem.
Thank you. I know that's going to be an ongoing conversation into the coming years. I know I'm going to defer questions around fraud to the next panel, although I'm assuming that EDD will still be available for questions after that. One final comment and set of questions, and that is about the recommendations in this report. So the strike team has finished its work, and I think the top concern many of us have is these are great recommendations. How do we ensure they're all going to get done? We've learned today that 53 of the 111 recommendations aren't even in progress, and we haven't received an accounting of what this looks like. And so my question to the director is, I'm assuming you support the recommendations from the LAO about a progress tracker so that we can see exactly where all these recommendations are. I'd like to also ask the strike team, what is going to be your involvement for ensuring these recommendations are done? And let me just note from the strike team report that there were many instances. It was fascinating reading, because we learned, for example, that even though the strike team recommended that EDD turn off certain things that were flagging claims for manual processing, EDD resisted that, and the strike team concluded that EDD could have avoided sending hundreds of thousands of claims to manual processing if it had listened to the strike team report. The strike team also wrote that a number of these issues were so simple to fix that there is no excuse for why they weren't addressed prior to the release of this report. So many of us who read this are concerned because we provided many of the recommendations in this report to EDD for months, and we were not listened to. So the concern is, now that the strike team is done, who's actually going to hold EDD accountable for getting this done? So to Director Hilliard, love to know if you're going to be agreeing with the LAO recommendations around progress tracking, and to the strike team, want to understand your role moving forward.
Yes, absolutely we are. We've actually already plotted it out, and we have a tracker going. So we're just finishing up in the next several weeks to finish up the dates that we need in order to, for each and every one of the recommendations. So absolutely, I think it's a great idea.
When can we receive that?
I would say by the end of the month.
Great. And then to Madam Secretary, again, I want to just thank you and your colleagues for your leadership. If it were up to me, you guys would keep working with EDD very closely for the next 6 to 12 months. I know you've got a lot of balls on your plate, but just curious, what will the involvement of the strike team be moving forward?
Member Chu, if I could step in for Secretary Richardson, and in fact, after this, I'd like to have an opportunity, if you would allow to, for me to provide some clarification back on the IDME statistic again. So specifically on the strike team continue role, this is a constant conversation, and we've been very open with EDD about the continued involvement, specifically from Department of Technology and Office of Digital Innovation. And in CDT's role in the oversight, we'll be monitoring a lot more closer with implementation on these stats that are driven by the implementation of a recommendation. And with the data-driven approach, if we're not seeing improvement in the expected time frame, and there's good data as well as evidence or backing for the results why, that would be the measure that needs to be very much implemented to continue to figure out if there's something else that's causing it, or is there some undiscovered issue that perhaps that's creeped up. And I think that level of a very much embedded interaction, as well as constant communication and with the support from the governor's office, we'll be able to stay quite engaged in terms of the implementation of EDD.
Great. Happy to engage with you and appreciate your involvement. I know that your department has been deeply engaged and I think has been very much a part of the positive movement when it comes to this report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Salas?
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cooper, and thank you for inviting me. I'm the chair of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, obviously looking at EDD. So really appreciate you taking leadership, and I know a lot of my colleagues here are chairs of other committees where this is very pertinent information. But I just have two quick questions, and I didn't hear it in Ms. Hilliard's presentation, but one, I do appreciate that EDD is working on the 111 strike team recommendations, even though, as Mr. Chu pointed out, 53 of those still have no progress on those. But just wanted to ask because, in my neck of the woods, I'm getting a lot of complaints, like I know a lot of my colleagues are, about the call centers. And when I read the strike team's report, and what I read, what struck out to me was that when Californians called EDD for assistance and help, 98.6% of them were told to call back because they couldn't resolve that issue on that first call. And so, Ms. Hilliard, if you could just help me understand how that's being addressed and why we have so many individuals that are so frustrated. How is that if you could just expand a little bit on that, because I didn't hear that in your presentation, please.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't provide a call center update this time because I did at the last hearing, but we continue to provide training. Right now, a lot of that training we're putting on hold while we work through the backlog. But as soon as the backlog's cleared, we'll be doing even more training and newsletters. We also implemented over the summer a data management system so people could quickly find the answers and be able to respond to our agents. We're also merging our call center and providing skill-based routing in the next, I think, October 22nd, which will help claimants get to a person that's trained in specific areas. So we take the call center, we're really working hard to make sure it's an excellent service for our customers.
Got it. And what is your response just to the strike team report that actually said when they went to some of these call centers that people weren't picking up the phones and not answering phones? Because obviously that's very frustrating for a lot of Californians around the state who are trying to get answers. And so if you have a response to why people weren't picking up the calls at these call centers, individuals are hired to answer these calls and nobody's answering the calls. And I know that there was some discrepancy because people started working from home, but there should still be some accountability for actually doing the job.
The people that that are in the office that have been working in the call center also do claim filing, so they're not on the phones all the time. I can't tell you what the strike team saw at the time, but the majority of people that answer phones are working from home through our virtual network. We had a much smaller amount statewide in the offices that were answering phones, and again, those people were also doing claim filing, so they're not on the phone full time at any point. So I wasn't there, so I can't speak to what they saw.
Can you speak to perhaps the metrics you use to make sure that there's accountability to ensure that people are doing their job and resolving some of the, not only answering the phones, but resolving some of the claims?
While they're on the calls.
Yeah, just the
well,
metrics you use and the accountability to make sure people are doing their job over at EDD.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have those metrics right on me, but needless to say, all the folks work under managers that monitor it very closely and work with each person to develop their performance and make sure that they're meeting or exceeding performance. And if they're not, then additional training's provided, any kind of corrective action, anything. So.
Got it.
So-
And I just wanted to highlight this because this is one of the frustrations I hear from different Californians up and down the state. You know, they want to know, like, who's being held accountable, are things being done when they read a report where, you know, like I said, 98.6% of people are not getting their issue resolved, at least on that first phone call or even subsequent calls. I believe the chairman asked earlier, what's the longest backlog, and it's still months away. Here we are, you know, almost half a year later, 6 months, and people are obviously still frustrated. So if I could go back and tell them, look, these are the metrics, this is how we're making sure that EDD is being held accountable and that people are answering and resolving cases, you know, that will go a long way, I think, for the community and for Californians.
Yeah, one of the biggest improvements that we're making, this was based on working with other vendors this spring, was we're in the process of instituting a command center over our call center and putting in a whole software system in order to actually compile metrics. We're in the process of doing that, so we're really moving towards that accountability around that so soon.
Okay, great. I think we'd appreciate some of that. Maybe it's in the dashboard, some of that accountability and those metrics that are being used would be great, I think, as follow-up. But my second question was really centered on, you guys have talked a lot about ID Me and it being able to resolve a lot of the issues that you're seeing over at EDD. Obviously, we've been seeing a lot of media accounts and even through our offices hearing of a lot of cases, for instance, where somebody's being mailed, you know, 10 letters or multiple EDD debit cards to one address, and trying to figure out why over at EDD this wasn't flagged in the first place to say, look, there's got to be an issue here. If 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, you know, debit cards are being mailed to one address or letters addressed to multiple people but still going only to one address. Now, is ID Me going to fix all of that?
Yes, it does address that because we know at the very get-go, at the front end, the person we're dealing with is the person. So that will help.
Got it. Now, that begs the question why that wasn't done before, but let's set that aside for a second. What is being done to make sure, as we move forward, you're trying to capture it at the front end, but are you doing anything in the back end with investigators or anything else to look at some of these fraudulent claims?
Oh, absolutely. So on the handout that I provided you earlier, there's a section on fraud. And that's where our investigators come in, and we're utilizing a variety of tools, whether it's through our Department of Labor. I sort of try to list it all there for you. But we take it very seriously, and we have plenty, unfortunately, we have plenty of leads.
Got it. Would you be able to tell me at this time, because the legislature did allocate resources and money to EDD earlier in anticipation of the cases that we do, but how many more investigators on the fraud side did you hire over at EDD?
We didn't add more investigators at this point. We are filling, but
okay. Would you have any idea how much money taxpayers have lost due to some of these fraudulent claims?
no, that's not something that we track.
Okay, that's a little
It's going
frustrating.
to be in the hundreds of millions. Ms. Petrie Norris?
Yes, we'll come back to that topic when we dive into the fraud conversation. But thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I just want to say thank you, Secretary Richardson, for your leadership and also for the work of your co-lead, Ms. Palka, and your entire team, as you said, who have been working tirelessly around the clock in order to address these critical issues and begin to make progress and start to do a better job serving the people of California. We do greatly appreciate that. I want to start with a couple of questions for the Secretary. around ID.me. So we heard the LAO in the LAO's testimony, Mr. Alamo mentioned that the ID.me technology probably should have been implemented years ago. Secretary Richardson, do you share that assessment? I don't know if Secretary
Hi, this is Amy again. I wanted to see if it's okay for me to cover this specific question on behalf of Secretary Richardson.
Yes, please, thank you.
Yes, from a strike team aspect, the identity verification as the main cause for a lot of the backlogs, and the need for improve that at the very first step is something that obviously, based on the strike team assessment, there's evidence supporting that. I would say that yes, one would hope that this was implemented earlier, but I think it's also fair to say that with the strike team, we have true evidence and data supporting that decision. So implementing right now is the right thing to do.
And my colleague, Assemblymember Chu, raised some questions about whether or not the implementation of ID.me is living up to the expectations of the strike team. Can you just provide us a little more information on that front? Is the implementation thus far meeting your expectations, and what percentage of claims are actually being resolved automatically because of the implementation of ID.me?
Thank you for that question. I wanted to have a chance to clarify Assemblymember Chu's reference on the percentage as well. I like to separate out two percentage that being used in reference. One is the ID.me's percentage of number of individuals who apply for verification of their identity and has been able to pass that identity with a successful approval, 64, and as of to date, that already went up to 70%. That percentage is different than the number of claimants or the percentage that the strike team report has strived for automation at EDD, which you have seen as 91 or 94%. So keep thinking of this way, the individual who apply for ID.me is taking the very step to getting themselves identified through a verification process. They may or may not immediately go to UI online at EDD to apply for a claim. So that percentage, as Sharon has mentioned, we are working closely with EDD, and EDD is monitoring that on a daily basis to see how that percentage is being achieved. But the 91, 94 percentage, it's about the UI online, not the same as the ID.me verification percentage, which currently is 64 to 70%. And as just for another point of a reference, ID.me implementation is at a national level. At the federal level, the Federal Veterans Affairs, as well as Social Security Administration, just to name a few, have implemented it, and several other states. So on this national average, the passing rate for success is hovering at about 80%. And for the states that have higher percentage or complexity, potentially due to fraud, the average that we have seen is hovering between 70 to 75%. So with that, from the early indication that we have seen, we are actually quite happy with the passing rate of 70% achieved by ID.me.
Okay, all right, understood. Thank you for that. Director Hilliard, a couple of questions for you. So, not to be looking backwards, but I think I'm just trying to wrap my head around the assessments in the strike team report and really where we go from here. So when we've had two previous hearings, and you blamed the department backlog and the issues and the nightmare that was unfolding at EDD on two things. You blamed it on the legacy systems issues, and then you blamed it on a lack of staffing, and we're moving to hire, and I think actually did hire something like 5,000 people. As I read the strike team report, it's actually really a fundamental rebuke of both of those strategies or both of those assessments. So, number one is the strike team report points out that this backlog is due not to outdated technology, but to operational shortcomings. So do you agree with that assessment?
Well, first of all, it's more of the I see it more of the technology where the IDME was so instrumental, because once the PUA program came into play, from an operational standpoint, it was very slow processing because we didn't have the correct tools to help with the operations. And then once we did, as we implemented recently, that's just putting us in a much better position.
Okay. And in terms of the hiring of huge thousands of new staff members, the strike team report points out that that was not only just a total waste of taxpayer dollars, but that it was actually counterproductive and ultimately made things even worse. So, and they advised you to stop hiring those people. I guess two questions. Do you agree with that assessment? And number two, what is the plan now with those 5,000 new EDD staff members?
So it wasn't a matter that we didn't need everybody. It was a matter of how we were allocating our staff and while we were trying to tackle the backlog. So we do need all these people, and we've just moved them to different areas of responsibility until such time we get through the backlog and we can continue to train them. Now, we have about 1,800 people still with us from other departments and other branches within our department that will be returning over the next several months. So all the people that we have hired that are already helping to mitigate and bring down the backlog, thus some of the less complex stuff, but nevertheless, it all goes to the backlog, will continue to be, will pick up their training again following the backlog being burned down. So again, every single person is needed. It's just a matter of how we were utilizing them and allocating out the work.
I think I would say, and we can, unfortunately, it looks like Secretary Richardson's not here, so perhaps we can get one of the strike team folks to clarify the assessment, because the way that I read the assessment is that implementation of a relatively straightforward, commercially available technology fix for identity verification that would have kept 40% of claims from going to manual processing would have obviated the need to hire thousands of additional staff members. So that was how I read the strike team assessment, which sounds like it was different than yourself. And so I guess just my final question is that the strike team report notes that in addition to some of these tactical issues, in order to move EDD forward, there needs to be a shift in culture and a transformational change. Do you believe that you are the right leader to occasion that shift in culture and transformational change to get this department on track?
I absolutely do believe I'm the right leader, and I have to say, with the new appointments of our two new chief deputy directors and our legislative director, as well as our new general counsel, has already brought some great ideas to the forefront, and we're starting to relook at things in a way that we haven't before. I've totally embraced it. I appreciate their input and their guidance, and we are following the guidance, and as a collective, making decisions as a collective body, I think we're on a good path.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, just one question for Ms. Hilliard before we go to our second panel. Regarding your 27 investigators, how much fraud have they identified so far?
I don't know the number of fraud. We right now have 75 active investigations going on. Like I said, we have 27. We didn't add a lot of resources, but they are continuing to hire. Unfortunately, hiring peace officers is a very long process, but they are in the hiring mode.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and switch to our next panel. And oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Nazarian. Oh, okay. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and switch to our second panel. In our second panel, we have Lester Friedman, the mayor of the city of Beverly Hills, and also Mark Coopwood, who's the Assistant Chief of Police for the City of Beverly Hills and formerly a member of the Sacramento Police Department. And they're actually at a remote location in Van Nuys. Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
You hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we just started. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'm Mayor Lester Friedman from the City of Beverly Hills. Thank you for allowing me to represent Beverly Hills here today for this important discussion. The COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically affected business districts across California, and Beverly Hills is no different. We've seen many storefronts closed permanently, while others have dramatically transformed to meet new health and safety standards. Amid these changes, we also saw an increase in traffic and parking violations, the open use of marijuana in public, and the appearance of illegal street vendors and gambling on our iconic Rodeo Drive. As our police department inquired further, our merchants advised that they had seen a significant increase in cash purchases, as well as the frequent use of EDD cards. This began the comprehensive strategy by our police department to problem solve and address the crimes that were occurring on Rodeo Drive and throughout our business district. With the chair's permission, I'd like to turn to our Assistant Chief of Police, Mark Coopwood, to discuss the proactive steps we took to mitigate these crimes and the unfortunate misuse of critical unemployment benefits in California.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Cooper. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing the mayor and I this opportunity to come and meet with your committee. I can tell you our community in Beverly Hills has never experienced the issues that we have seen in the last 60 days to this level. And we really received daily complaints from all facets of our community. As a result, we took a group of officers led by a sergeant and really asked them to go down to our business district and to use the famous SARA model of problem solving through community-oriented policing. What is the SARA model? We scanned the problem, we analyzed what was probably creating the problem, we responded to the problem, and now we're in the assessment phase where we're looking at what we can do and what EDD can do to help resolve further issues and really to mitigate future occurrences of, in my 26 years, the most, the most fraud I've ever seen within a 60-day period in my 26 years, and that includes my time with the city of Sacramento. What we were seeing was there was a need to meet with our business community as well, because we really had to educate them on what the fraud was. They were seeing individuals coming up with as many as 4 to 5 fraudulent EDD cards at one time, and they were coming in with large amounts of cash, up to $30,000 at one time. Through the SARA model and different investigative techniques that we deployed, in the last 60 days, we've arrested over 100 people for EDD fraud. Most alarming is we've recovered 13 firearms. And why is that alarming? Along Rodeo Drive, they had not recovered a firearm in 18 years. And in 30 days, we recovered 13 firearms. We recovered over 200 fraudulent EDD cards with an estimated street value of over $4 million. We recovered over $500,000 in U.S. currency. We recovered over $50,000 of U.S. postal money orders. And the most alarming thing was we were seeing most of the people arrested were coming from out of state, with New York leading the way, Georgia number 2, and the state of California had 16 people that used that as their residency. We immediately set up a hotline to try to get more information from our community. And once we released all this information into the media, we had to create a hotline because we were receiving calls from everyone throughout the state and throughout the nation. We contacted our local, our state, and our federal law enforcement partners to include EDD, and we asked them to help us with the adjudication and the follow-up pieces of these cases. As you all are well aware of, identity theft and fraud-related cases are very labor-intensive, and they take a lot of time from a department our size. I'm happy to say that we have partnered federally with the Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Labor, to adopt a majority of our cases. We are going to have the rest of them looked at through the Los Angeles County DA's office, and we have an agreement with the State Attorney General's office as well. While this all seems positive, I can tell everybody we will not arrest our way out of this problem. We need to see systematic changes at EDD that we have all got together and are going to offer some of the solutions that we think will help EDD. More importantly, we're more than happy to partner with EDD and help them with some of the things the brightest minds in our industry at the federal, the local, and the state level have offered. What are those solutions? ID.me verification tool is a strong start. We need to be able to identify the people that are making these claims either through a government ID like a passport or a driver's license. This is a big one, the next one. Allow only one claim per application per IP address. We noticed initially in our follow-up, we've seen as many as 100 cards issued under the same IP address. If one IP address was only allowed per one claim, that would help a lot. Allow only one card to be sent to one address or one PO box. We've recovered as many as 100 cards in the city of Beverly Hills, all in different names to one address. Discontinue the back pay. We were seeing some of these cards backloaded with almost $20,000 on them. Have EDD deposit the money into a legitimate bank account. Discontinue allowing cash withdrawals from the ATMs. We were seeing people withdrawing as much as $1,000 per card right in front of us on video and literally throwing the envelopes away in the nearby trash bin and grabbing the new card out of a new envelope and withdrawing another $1,000 from the Bank of America ATM. Discontinue allowing U.S. postal money orders to be purchased with these cards. And then lastly, let's find a way together to regulate what aid can and cannot be used for with these cards. I think we all agree the cards were not meant to shop along Rodeo Drive. In closing, we appreciate, we respect, and we know that EDD provides a legitimate resource to people who truly need the help. The state of California is a victim. However, the identity theft victims are also going to be dealing with the aftermath of this for many, many years to come. Specifically, next year, they're going to receive a 1099 with income that they're going to be expected to claim. That is not their income. They did not earn that. But they're going to have to work with the IRS for years to get their names cleared. And again, I want to reemphasize, the city of Beverly Hills wants to be part of the solution. Please include us. We'd be more than happy to work with the director of EDD and offer anything else that we can provide as far as a long-term solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just real quick, and this is fraud's a big issue with this, and obviously it's Beverly Hills, and we're seeing this throughout California. So I believe the assistant chief, I want to thank him for testifying, and also the mayor. But what's also troubling, what we're seeing with this on the bank cards, because I'm a Wells Fargo customer, I can withdraw $700 a day. Most banks have limits. There's no limits on these cards. But, going back to the IP address and addresses, obviously if you're a working family, you may have 2 cards, but I'm not sure if my colleagues are aware of this, but if you haven't heard of informed delivery on your address, so if you request it through the United States Postal Service, they will send you a picture of your mail that's supposed to be arriving that day or the next day. So what's going on with a lot of these folks, for Mr. Chu, I'm a bad guy, I'm using your address, I will claim it and have the post office send me a picture of your mail that's coming the next day. So I'll make sure to go to your mailbox to intercept your mail. So anyone can do that right now. So a lot of these folks are doing this. It's being sent to houses where no one lives, or things like that. So that's the way they scam it. So it's called informed delivery through the U.S. mail. So they send you an email with photographs of your mail that's going to be delivered an address. So just simple things like that. And I'll be honest with you, why go out and rob a bank? Why go out and deal drugs? This is white-collar crime, and white-collar crime is treated with kid gloves for the most part. It's, a lot of folks have been very dismissive of it. So you see the folks that are doing this, and also, since Bank of America sends the debit cards, take a look at how many money orders are being generated statewide. And there's one place they go to, I'm not going to say it, that they get most of the money orders are. And I guess we need to track where these money orders are going, because there is a trail. And I know EDD doesn't really have a number of fraud, but conservatively in the hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion, a lot of money out there. And I know the issue was to make sure we pay the legitimate claimants first and get that out there. And we've done a better job at that. They're getting better, but at some point we have to turn to the fraud issue. And with 27 investigators statewide, they can't do it. They're not doing it. They will never do it. God bless them, but it falls on local law enforcement, the shoulders of those folks to do it. So we've got to do more with that. So, Mr. Lackey?
Yes, thank you. What I would like to do is just emphasize how big the problem is. In my district alone, we've received nearly 650 envelopes that we suspect are fraudulent, because the names of these envelopes that are on these envelopes never lived at the addresses they were sent to. These are also single-family residences, not multi-unit complexes, so there's no reason for confusion. Many of the envelopes have, as we've been discussing, these debit cards from Bank of America, which are loaded with thousands of dollars. Because we've been talking verbally, I want to create a visual. These are the letters right here that we received in about 1 month. This is my district alone. We heard the evidence presented by the police officer just previously in Beverly Hills. I submit to you that statewide this is a gargantuan problem. I would like to suggest that the governor recognize this problem for what it is, because these are state resources that are going to be badly, badly needed as we're going to be facing deficits in our budget here in the near future. We need to investigate and have mitigation processes in place right away, because this problem is going to continue to grow, and I would hope that we could set up a task force that could help unite local resources as well as, because the state resources are woefully unable to handle this problem. And so I would hope that we would give it the attention it deserves, because these circumstances are going without any kind of investigation in most cases. We need to do better than this. Our resources need to be respected, and that's all I have.
Mr. Salas?
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Cooper. I had said a specific question, and I believe it's the assistant chief or the chief, and maybe the mayor. But when you investigated these cases in your own jurisdiction, obviously you don't have, or I don't believe you have ID.me, like EDD is now implementing. Like, how did you find these cases, were able to do this? Because I want to see what you guys have done and figure out why EDD hasn't done the same thing.
Yeah, so we, it was really a case-by-case basis. We, the short answer is when we made the whatever investigative stop we did, we noticed that the cardholder did not match the person that was detained. And then what we did is we also took the receipts from whatever retail establishment that the merchandise was purchased from, and we were able to match the fraudulent debit card to the stolen merchandise, or the merchandise that was purchased with the fraud. So the short answer is we were able to identify the person who we had detained, and we saw that that was not the person on the card. And you really asked a question that segues into the follow-up. So now finding the victim, besides the state of California, who the card is really in the name of, is very challenging and very labor intensive.
Got it. So when you first identified the individual, how did that happen? Was that because of something identified from EDD, or was they arrested on another charge? How did you initially identify the individual, and which led to, obviously, the bigger discoveries?
A lot of times it came from a call for service from our business community. Subjects would be trying to pass 4 to 5 EDD cards at once, and that was a red flag for the businesses. We really educated our business community from the start on what to look for. We did a lot of public service announcements, a lot of communications on what the cards look like, and that they're only supposed to have one, and to ask for a legitimate form of ID to verify the cardholder. So we would respond to a call for services. One is one scenario that we had a lot of. And then the other ones would be just good old-fashioned police work. We'd make a traffic stop, which led to a legal search of the vehicle, and we would find the EDD cards and the firearms and the large amounts of cash concealed within the vehicle. Those are really probably the two most prominent and reoccurring cases we had with those two examples.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, perhaps when it's appropriate, we can ask EDD as a follow-up. You know, we wanted to make sure that we had flags when multiple things were sent to an address, like Mr. Lackey has a whole carry-on of mail all to one individual address. But are we doing that also for, as the assistant chief talked about, people trying to use 4 or 5 debit cards at one single time at one business? I think that should raise a red flag somewhere within the department to identify that, or have the fraud investigators look into that. So when it's appropriate. Thank you, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Oh, okay, so nothing right now on fraud then. Okay, then I'll go to Mr. Nazarian.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I had some questions for the first panel, and before I start, I'd like to echo the sentiments of some of my colleagues who have already thanked Secretary Richardson and Ms. Palka for their work. I very much appreciate the speed and the level of detail and depth that was put into the study. So, first and foremost, I have a couple of questions. I'll start with the processing of claims being so specialized and complex that it requires a 800-page training manual and 3 years of experience schooling and formal testing to progress from an entry-level accounting tech to an account 1, and additional 3 years to progress to subsequent tiers. And this is all part of the strike team report. So first, Where are we with new employee hirings at this point? Ms. Hillard?
Yes, we've hired about 4,200 people to date. We still have additional people coming in. At the time the strike team made their recommendations, we already had job commitments made to people, so we wanted to honor our job commitments. But as of this moment, we've brought in 4,200 people,
How many more are we going to hire?
about 1,000.
About 1,000 more.
And remember, we do have 2,000 people that are going to be going back to their original programs and to other departments in the next couple months.
So
We're gonna
of the total of 5,200, 2,000 are going to go back. So we're going to be left with 3,200.
So we have, right now today, we have 5,600. We have a little over 1,800 that are from other branches in EDD and other departments that are scheduled to go back in the next 3 or 4 months. And then we also have Deloitte until the end of December. So we're at 79, 71 right now, and then we're still bringing on board people, and so we have about another 1,000 to go. So that brings us to almost 9,000.
Okay, so you're going to be at 1,000, but of that 1,000, 1,800 are going to go back to their branches, and I suspect another 300 or 400 or so are with Deloitte. Is that accurate?
So we'll have about 9,000, and 2,000 will be going back to their branches, and 500 from Deloitte. So
500 from Deloitte.
Right.
Okay. When was the last time that the 800-page training manual was updated?
we have a training unit that constantly is updating our manuals. And in fact, I think as you may remember, over the summer, we contracted with a company named Aventis, and we've been moving all of our training materials into a training management system that has really helped people be able to bring up the information they need at their fingertips. So we're totally updating and modernizing our training materials so that they're really real time and allows people to respond quickly. So we'll be glad to provide you the slide deck on it at a later date if you'd like to see all the specifics of what that entails.
I'd be very curious to, and I, by the way, I don't, apologies, but I don't really recall the conversation from summer having to do with this specific aspect. So I'm happy to review my notes again, but I didn't see anything. I'd be very interested to see what's being done, because I'm just wondering if the new hires are expected to answer questions. How were they even prepared to proceed with offering their support and help when there is such an exhaustive training manual required for them to be able to digest?
Well, training is iterative. You don't digest 900 pages and you wait till the end to start performing work. We train people on different skills, different workloads, and give them time to become proficient. They go into training, and they also have mentors. And that's where we were having a little struggle, because the mentors were also our experienced folks. So, but it does take time, and it in order to have a workforce up and running at the level that you need.
When we started this whole thing, at the beginning of the year, what was the number of employees at your department?
Well, within our UI program, we were a little over 2,000.
That's it? Or
That's it.
so,
In our UI program. Mm-hmm.
well, I'm saying in order to be able to compare to 79, 71 total that you have now, and moving upwards to about 9,000 with another additional 1,000 hires, comparing apples to apples, what were the total number of employees at the beginning of the year?
We had about 2,000, and if you're comparing apples to apples, then if you take the 9,000 and back out the redirected staff in Deloitte, then you'd have apples and apples. So
Right.
what's,
Right, okay. So I'm asking that because I'm just trying to get a sense, if once we get to 9,000 and then we cut back by another 2,500, we're roughly around 6,500. So on an ongoing basis, we're gonna have 6,500 employees, which
possibly,
which
we
means-
depend,
which means that's 3 times the number of employees we had at the beginning of this year. So the inexperienced individuals are dwarfing the number of experienced individuals. So how is that being managed?
well, like, for one thing, the new hires are limited term because when the pandemic unemployment and program started in the CARES Act, it was temporary in nature. So at some point, they will not be working for EDD, assuming that Congress doesn't pass something in the end of December and we have something else to take its place or to continue it. So
Okay, and when do you see that tapering off?
what would you say, 6 months? A good 6 months, assuming it's not extended.
So what would the number come back down to? Would it go back to, again, 2,000? Or,
It could, but with the new tool that the strike team provided us, it's the burn down chart, as I referred to it. It's a predictive model where we can put in inventories, workloads, and staffing and figure out exactly what we need and make adjustments in between the workloads. So that's what we'll be using moving forward to make sure that we have the right number of staff at the right levels to meet all of our workloads. And right now, it says we need all of them.
okay. All right, so let's look at things on a 30,000 feet view. Strike team had made some extensive number of detailed recommendations. Do you, or does EDD, or do you and your leadership team agree with all of them?
Yes, we did agree with all of them.
So who's going to be in charge with implementing all the recommendations? And what timeline?
So we will have a timeline completed by the end of the month, and we'll be glad to provide you our matrix that shows all the recommendations as well as when we expect to implement them. Most of them, I think 91 of the 111 are IT solutions. So our IT branch will be implementing those in partnership with our UI branch. And our new Chief Deputy Director, Carol Williams, has oversight over the implementation of all the strike team's recommendations.
Okay. So then the non-IT, let's say, strike team talked a lot about the culture of EDD and the changes that needed to be made. Does EDD agree with the assessment?
I think the main
on the change of culture, and how would they go about changing the culture?
The main culture change they're referring to is really around fraud and how we were looking at the balance of making sure we pay people yet protect the fund. And that's a tricky balance, and that is very difficult. So again, I think part of our cultural change, which I really appreciate, is with the hire of a new executive team that I mentioned earlier with our new 2 chief deputy directors, as well as a new chief counsel and a new ledge director, have already shown and proven that they're bringing new, fresh ideas and a new look at things. So I welcome that, and they've already been extraordinary, and we're getting in and making sure that it's reflective in a culture that we're all proud of.
So,
For
okay,
us,
then
number one thing is pay benefits.
Then
And then,
speaking of the fraud issue, and given the fact that you're more, as it was pointed out with some of the previous questions, that more of the, it seemed like the approach and the leaning was to not pay and assume that there's fraud, and so go through exhaustive verification. Where was that coming from? Was there a high rate of incidence of fraud, or was it specialized in specific regions throughout the state? Where was that thinking and approach based on?
yeah, that was their perception. Like I said, it is a very hard balance. I think where it really focused in was a couple years ago. There was a national, it was called the Spring Break case, and hit the unemployment insurance programs hard throughout the nation. Department of Labor was the one that really led the charge in working with all the states. But that's when we really started, a couple years ago, we really started to see an influx of people having other people's ID and other identifying information so they could infiltrate our systems. Where it came really bad was when Congress passed the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program and implemented that, because it has very little checks and balances, and made it just, unfortunately, although I know the incentive was to make sure everyone gets paid, and that was what they're focused on, the downstream effect was it opened the door for fraud in a way that we've never seen before.
So then, well, okay, I don't want to get too much into the fraud issue right now. Going back to the culture issue, reason why I was bringing it up, and you said that it has to do a lot more with, in the report it had more focus on fraud. Reason why I was bringing it up is because when you look at something like the ID verification for the claimants, and the fact that the scanner in the verification unit couldn't detect the red color, and that created quite a bit of a backlog because individuals needed to go in and manually conduct that. Reason why I associate this with culture is because when you have weekly meetings, executive meetings, or bi-weekly, or however way you do it, you discuss different issues and you see things that you can point out to that are en masse creating a problem and a holdup. And I'm just trying to understand something that may have been so obvious that could have been addressed and created so much backlog. How was that not readily seen or come up in your meetings? I mean, I suspect you do have executive meetings on a relatively frequent basis. How was something like that not identified and brought up, and it required a strike team to come in and identify it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I hear what you're saying. So the department for the last few years, we've had a project portfolio, and we tried to prioritize all the projects across the enterprise and apply resources as we can to make sure that we're implementing all the improvements, all the efficiencies. But like any department, we've got more work than we have actual resources. And when the pandemic hit, it became even more challenging. That's why the strike team came in. They actually came in and brought additional resources because there just wasn't enough of us that were able to address all the issues swiftly enough. Our focus, our people are mainly on actually paying the benefits and producing the work. So when you're, trying to revolutionize your IT system and your processes and every function, in one fell swoop, that doesn't happen overnight. It just doesn't.
But I'm pointing out to something very specific that I would have hoped when this is contributing. I think I remember something about around 40%, or this had a significant contribution to the lagging of the process.
I'm not exactly
something like this, I would have assumed would have come up relatively quickly, or at least within a month's period of time, when it becomes very noticeable that this is an issue.
I would expect, I mean, we encourage our employees to speak to their managers and raise all issues and talk about improvement. We have many courses on business process and improvement for all of our staff. That's sort of the basis of, our mantra. Yeah, I would hope so too. I'm not familiar with exactly the one you're talking about, but, absolutely. We're always looking to make improvements, and we are. It's a constant.
Okay, this was something very specific in the report that discussed how the scanner, when the California driver's license would be scanned, the red ink dye wouldn't be picked up, and so certain information needed to be manually input. So that's why I'm just picking on something relatively simple that would have been easily noticed and would have been picked up, especially if multiple incidents, reoccurring incidents happen to the point where employees start talking to one another about it. None of that got up to management level and ultimately to you?
No, it did not reach me. And I would hope it did rate to the managers and that they were actively working on it. I can't speak to it. I wasn't aware.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Ting?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I wanted to just talk to LAO a little bit about this issue that we were talking about regarding culture. So if LAO could, Mr. Alamo could come back, because I had similar questions as my colleague from Los Angeles. Just regarding the culture, can you identify sort of what you experienced as you were looking at EDD, to give us a better sense of why was there this culture and this focus on fraud, and at the same time we had a huge number of cases of fraudulent behavior. So somehow, even though the culture was very much focused on fraud, somehow they missed all this fraud that was going on. So help me understand what you saw.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Ting. I should first and foremost note that my comments about the culture at EDD are specific to my experience interacting with the department, are in no way conclusive. And then secondarily, I would want to separate sort of a long-standing focus on fraud prevention per federal standards for the state's normal underlying UI program. I want to separate that from fraud that's been seen with the PUA program that was passed as part of the CARES Act, because they're two different issues, I think, in our view. So first, related to sort of the long-standing focus on fraud prevention. In my conversations with the department and experience working with EDD, it's clear that the department is reading incentives from the federal government pertaining to minimizing the number of overpayments that it issues. And that guidance comes from the Department of Labor. And as all state departments do that are interacting with federal counterparts that dictate rules and regulations, the department was taking efforts to meet those sort of incentives and messages from the federal government. That said, the federal government also equally prioritizes the prompt payment of benefits. And so when we compare the department's treatment of those two sort of, let's say, targets that may be in opposition or imbalanced, it appears that the department has tended to prefer focusing on fraud prevention relative to issuing benefit payments in a timely fashion. Now, to the second point, Mr. Ting, related to fraud that's recently been uncovered in the PUA program, as both the Secretary Richardson and Director Hilliard mentioned, the federal program recently stood up and included very few steps that would limit this sort of activity. If a fraudulent actor had obtained identifying information from a previous data breach they could submit that information through the requirements under federal law for the PUA program, and the claim could go through cleanly. There would be nothing built into the design of the claim to catch that fraudulent activity. Now, when EDD did begin noticing the trends in this fraudulent activity, multiple claims going to a single address, just looking at the trends lines in the number of applications, there were some inconsistencies. They took several steps to not only establish fraud issues at the outset, but also to reduce the incentive. So the main step that I want to point out is that the department stopped automatically certifying prior week's benefit payments. And so in order to go back, to receive a backdated claim under the PUA program now, there's another touch point with EDD to confirm the identity of that claimant. And this prevents a fraudulent actor from claiming, say, 15 or 20 weeks of back payments, which is why you were seeing $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 EDD debit cards that were being used fraudulently. All signs indicate as of now that step that was instituted several weeks ago by the department is significantly reducing the number of applications for the PUA program and likely reducing the amount of fraudulent activity there.
So thank you for the clarification regarding the PUA program. Obviously, the way that program was set up, there are there's a lack of conditions that make it very, very difficult to ensure that the actual people are the ones who deserve the claim. So I do understand that. So thank you for that clarification. So based on your observations, have you seen a shift so that there's now more of a balance? As you said, you have two similar incentives, one on the amount of time to do to process a claim, as well as the minimizing of overpayments. So have you seen at least a shift or more of a balance so that there is more of a focus on the amount of time it takes to process a claim?
I must say that I'm not in a position to have seen a shift internal at EDD and whether or not it has occurred or is occurring. What I will say is that the strike team report clearly illuminates this balancing act and clarifies that EDD has historically tended to favor focusing on fraud relative to benefit timely payment. And in this regard, we believe that the report itself and this assessment and these findings, at least in identifying the cultural balance that the department must strike, should at least sort of facilitate this conversation, the one that we're having here today, going forward, such that the legislature can also provide its input on where it would prefer the department land on this balance.
Thank you. I just want to go back to Director Hilliard. So given the LAO's, I'll just call it an observation rather than a data. Based on the LAO's observation, where you have the similar federal incentives for minimizing overpayments as well as making sure that people are paid in a prompt manner, has the department started to move the staff in a manner so that claims are getting processed in a faster manner?
Well, definitely, through all the efficiencies in ID.me and the whole redirection of putting staff, experienced staff on the complex cases. I mean, paying staff or paying benefits timely is it's foundational. It's incredibly important to us. Now I know the strike team felt that we had a more propensity to fraud. We really have just been trying to balance both, and both are very important to us. But I would say between the two, paying people UI benefits has a higher nod than the fraud. So we need to be able to make sure we're addressing both. But our top concern is making sure that people are receiving benefits.
No, thank you. And can you just, for the committee, just explain to us how that's been communicated to the staff?
How that's been communicated? We provide newsletters every quarter. I send out directors' messages. The deputy directors communicate it. I mean, It's also in our training manuals as far as the importance of paying benefits. I mean, the flavor is everywhere.
Well, those are all very broad
Yeah.
communications. I mean, you have thousands of people who work with you, but you also have direct supervisors. So have you, with your senior team, talked about it and talked about how to give that directive to your subordinates, the supervisors, the different managers all around the state?
Right, I haven't started there yet. I've started with our general counsel and our chief deputy directors that just started. We had a discussion about that, and I've already enlisted my general counsel to take a look at the policies and procedures of all the branches to ensure that they are, mirroring the kind of department we want to be proud of. So,
usually you talk to your general counsel to make sure you're not doing something that's in violation of law versus.
Yes, but I'm having her make sure that, looking at all the policies, that it's protecting our claimants. I want to make sure that we're doing right by them. That's the incentive behind it.
But based on what you just said, it sounds like there hasn't been any direct, verbal, continuous communication to your management staff.
Not in specific. We give, fraud 49% and paying benefits 51%. I mean, we take both very seriously. But it is something I certainly could look at, and I thank you for the feedback. And given the strike team's report, this probably is a great opportunity to broadly sort of lay the foundational look of where we're going in the future. I think that's an excellent suggestion.
No, thank you. And just going back to the dashboard, I appreciate that the dashboard was very much implementing the budget bill that was passed. Now, again, those were specific items to be implemented, but they didn't limit you from implementing additional items. So just in looking at your dashboard, and I have it pulled up on the computer, it's very difficult to tell how, not difficult, it's impossible to tell how large the backlog is unless I start surfing around your web. Is there a reason why the backlog's not an easily identifiable number on the dashboard?
So right now we really have two sets of dashboards going on. We have the dashboard through AB 107, and we also have the dashboards that we have now just publicly launched as a result of the strike team. So it was our intent to work with the committee and recommend that we replace the language in the 107 bill with the new dashboard recommended by the strike team, because we felt and we agreed that it's much more inclusive of everybody, both people that work that we have in queue as well as people that are stuck and don't know what to do. So that was going to be our next step, was to put a request in to look at changing the requirements of AB 107 and replacing it with the new dashboards. It just got created.
In the new dashboard, I'm looking at your PowerPoint page 5 is the one under the newsroom, and that's where I'm at right now. So that what I'm looking at is the new dashboard.
Okay, that's not part of 107 then. That is the new dashboard as recommended through the strike team. And there's two of them, one for initial claims and one for continued claims.
And where's the other one located? Because you only mentioned, in your PowerPoint, you just mentioned a new dashboard, and that's what I'm...
I broke down two, so let me turn to the page. So on slide 5, it talks about the initial claims backlog and the continued claims backlog. There's two dashboards currently being produced and displayed on our website.
Where's the second one? I'm at your newsroom.
So since I can't see what you're looking at, I'll be glad to email them.
If you look at, again, I'm at you see the bullet right afterwards on your own PowerPoint? It says the new dashboards can be located via EDD's newsroom on the department's website. So that's where I'm at. I'm on your department's website. I'm on newsroom. And at the very bottom of the newsroom, there's the unemployment insurance data dashboard.
So there's the data dashboard that's part of what's in the news press release. You can see it on the front page. Should also be a link to the two dashboards, one for claims and one for continued claims.
Oh, I see. Okay, so they're part of the links. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the challenge is just as my colleague from San Francisco reiterated, is that it is, again, it'd be nice to have something that we don't have to go searching throughout your website to go find, that it's all in one place. It's very difficult to go back and look at historic trends because you have to go click on that information. Also, is there a reason why the backlog is not on the dashboard?
The backlog is on the dashboard, on the initial claims and continued claims. That's what it's all about.
The PDF, I'm sorry. Okay. Is there a reason why that's not all in one place?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. If you have some suggestions on where you think it would be better housed, I would love to hear it.
Well,
And
I think,
I think it's confusing.
the fact that we've had to spend 5 minutes and you've had to walk me through it, and I'm sitting here on your website, demonstrates that it is confusing. And it demonstrates that the data is not easily accessible. So it would be nice to, again, to have it all in one place, to make it visually easy to look at. The more links you do, it's great for data geeks who love spending time on your website, but for most people, that's not what they would be looking at, and that's definitely not what I would like to spend time doing. And then in addition to that, is there a reason why you don't have the amount of time it takes to process a claim on your dashboard?
We do have a burn down chart that we work, which I referred to earlier. It's not part of the dashboard, but we certainly could put on the dashboard something like that.
I think it'd be helpful because I think it would demonstrate that you're making progress and that the claims are being processed in a faster fashion.
Yeah.
So that it would be based on data. Right now you're telling us that, but this way your own data would corroborate that. Going back to sticking with the backlog. You mentioned that you anticipate this 1.6 million person backlog to be cleared by January 2021. As of January 2021, then how large would you anticipate the backlog that you haven't been able to get to being? Because this is a static number based on that particular point in time, but I assume obviously more cases will be coming in. So how big a backlog will you have in January 2021?
Right, exactly. We will not have a backlog. The new tool that I referred to before that we're able to put in our resources, put in our workload, and project. This was a tool that came out of the strike team's efforts, has allowed us to predict and project and figure out how many staff are needed. So our burn down plan to liquidate the backlog through in January and then maintain working inventories moving forward.
Oh, that's
so
great.
we do not anticipate another backlog unless, of course, something out of our control changes. But at this point, we're on trajectory to burn it down and be able to maintain.
Great. So if I'm applying for a claim, or constituents of ours applying for a claim in January 2021, then we anticipate that claim would be filled in a timely fashion. I forget, is that like 3 weeks?
Right. Right.
Within the 3-week time frame?
Yes. And many of them are today, but even more will be with IDMe in place.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we never get, just like I'm sure you never really get to hear about those, we never hear about those. The people who get paid in 3 weeks, they don't call our offices.
Right.
So unfortunately, just like yourself, the cases that we hear about are really the most difficult, toughest, saddest cases. So I know my district office has continued to receive several constituent calls more recently regarding the Bank of America cards that have been suddenly frozen. Can you give us a sense as to sort of why are they being frozen, and whose accounts are being frozen, and was that something that the department directed them to do, or this is something that the bank is doing?
This is part of the Bank of America's fraud protection services, I guess. And that's what I mentioned, that B of A and our EDD and labor agency were meeting this afternoon.
Got it.
To walk through exactly what was going on, what makes sense, and look at that balance again between, paying claims versus, fighting fraud.
Okay.
So we're aggressively taking a look at that.
Thank you. So I think it'd be helpful. I know that you have, weekly calls with our various district offices. So I think it'd be helpful to give us an update at that weekly call, just to, so we understand as we're getting a number of different calls coming in, how do we continue to address them? Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
For Ms. Hilliard, once EDD realizes that's fraud suspected, what steps do you guys take?
If we identify fraud, has been, so there are a couple different routes. I mean, if administratively, we want to make sure that the correct person isn't being harmed, and we adjust their account to ensure that, they're being separated from the fraudster. And then as far as the fraudster goes, it is elevated to our investigation division to look at pursuing criminal action.
And you have no idea how many cases you currently have pending?
We have 74 open criminal cases right now. So that's what we have open right now.
Okay. Pre-pandemic, how many employees worked or telecommuted or worked at home?
Oh, a couple thousand maybe. More of our audit staff, and people had more mobile kind of. But now we've got at 70-80% working at home, which has added challenges.
Here's a concern of mine. Obviously, most of your employees don't have state-issued laptops. Is that correct?
Oh no, they do. We outfitted all of our folks when they became teleworkers.
So what percentage? I mean, all seven. How many are working at home right now? So 7,000 are working at home, or
70 to 80% of all of EDD staff.
have
Large.
So that 70 or 80% have state-issued laptops. Okay,
Yes.
that's actually pretty good. But still, it's difficult. Obviously, at work, people get set up for ergonomics and different things. So at work, it is a different. At home, it's vastly different working on a laptop and getting things done than working on a desktop and having monitors and whatnot.
Well, we provide docking stations as well as multiple screens because we want to make sure they're as efficient at home as they are in the office. So depending on the kind of work they're doing, we make sure they have the proper equipment to perform it as if they were in the office.
Well, I mean, that's a good thing. I'll commend you for that because most state agencies don't do that. And even here at the Capitol, a lot of folks are left up to their own devices. And I'm sure some employees are working on smartphones or laptops because, that's work should provide that. So thank you guys for doing that for your employees. Mr. Ting?
I just had one quick follow-up question. So regarding the new proposed dashboard, was GovOps going to be sending a joint legislative budget committee letter to address that issue?
No, EDD was going to start working on that next week. That was our thought.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to go back to the topic of fraud, and we've learned a lot in this hearing from the Beverly Hills Assistant Chief. This is the most fraud he's seen in 26 years. From our colleague, Mr. Lackey, 650 envelopes just in that suitcase, just from his district. And we've learned there are only 27 staffers in the EDD fraud unit, even though you have capacity to hire over 5,000 new staffers for a department of 9,000 people, only 75 active investigations. I have to admit, it's great to have this information. It's pretty shocking just how little work there seems to be done in this area. So there was a press investigative report recently that reported that within your department, you have determined at least 30,000 addresses with at least 10 social security numbers attached to each of them. And I know your department has been asked about it, and you have refused to deny or confirm whether that's the case. Could you tell us, is that the level of fraud that we're talking about?
So, as I'm sure you can appreciate, the reason we don't speak about the techniques that we're using or the numbers that we're using is we just don't want to tip off fraudsters. If we tell you what we're doing, the public what we're doing, then they'll just work around that and commit fraud in that area. So, and we don't want to, hinder the integrity of our investigations.
So I've heard that as the line from your communications secretary. I've reached out to you on a couple of occasions over the past month, on September the 2nd, September the 25th, just asking questions around fraud, not received any answers myself. I'm not going to ask you if you continue to ignore requests for information from all legislators or just some of us who are asking, but we have questions. My perspective as someone who used to be part of law enforcement is if someone's breaking into tens of thousands of homes and stealing personal property, you warn the public. You address the crime. If someone is stealing tens of thousands of people's identity, you warn the public, you address the crime. If someone's breaking into tens of thousands of bank accounts, you warn the public, you address the crime. In this instance, we have multiple criminal rings stealing from tens of thousands of people's identities, from bank accounts, from personal property, and your department has been silent. And your department has been silent. You're saying you don't want to, of course, we don't want to tell fraudsters how to do their job. They're already doing their job. But you're not warning the public on the level of fraud that's happening. You've given no detail on the types of crimes that are being committed against people so that people can be aware of what to look out for.
We've done a lot of public messaging as well as in our news release every Thursday. We address fraud every Thursday on what people need to do, what people need to look out for. So, we've done a lot of messaging around that because you're right, unless people know, then they can't protect themselves, and that is very important to us. And we need the public's eye on it and understanding and being able to help deal with this.
I was just, some of us were talking about the fact there's a music video on the web with 400,000 views on how easy it is to defraud the EDD. Are you aware of this?
Yes.
On a different aside, so our district staff, every couple of weeks, we talk to your staff about what to do with constituents who get these envelopes. And we have our colleague, Mr. Lackey, who's collected them in his suitcase. Our staff were told that if our constituents didn't want to put postage back on the letters to mail it back to your department, that they should just throw the envelope away, which is literally tantamount to destroying evidence of fraud. How is it that our staff are being told that?
So what we've been communicating to the public is that if they get these kinds of envelopes, send them back to as return to sender, whether it's to EDD for the notices or whether it's Bank America for the bank cards. If for some reason they don't feel comfortable with that, then what we're suggesting is that they shred all the evidence. At the end of the day, it's up to the individuals, their comfort level. We would like you to send them back, but if for some reason they're not comfortable, at a very minimum, make sure you shred.
I've never heard of a government agency suggesting that criminal evidence be shredded. We have a couple of us who used to be from law enforcement, and I would just ask Mr. Lackey, formerly from the California Highway Patrol, or our chairman, Mr. Cooper, a former sheriff, if that makes sense. But I don't think it does. Let me ask one other question. You stated you have no idea how much money has been stolen from the state or from our constituents, no idea of the level of fraud. So since the beginning of the pandemic until the end of this past month, EDD has sent out $94 billion. And I'm going to say it right here, but I'm sure there's been at least over $1 billion of fraud. I don't know what that number is, but it strikes me it's something that someone ought to investigate. And if you have a department of 9,000 people and only 27 are focused on fraud, who's guarding the henhouse? This is bureaucratic criminal negligence. And the fact of the matter is, this is also, it wasn't a focus of the strike team. And it just boggles our minds at this point that there doesn't seem to be enough attention on this. So let me ask a question. Have you convened a multi-agency task force on this?
Yes, I have.
And tell us about that.
So Chief Montoya of our investigation division leads the task force, and he works with our IT, he works with our information security, as well as the programs itself. He and the the work group have been meeting closely with Department of Labor over the last couple months to institute all the various tools that I referenced in the handout I provided you. Because you can add more people, but at the end of the day, this kind of, from a technology standpoint, it's really different technology options that really help the forensic review and detection of what's going on. I think, as the last panelists say, that when you get into case by case, it's very, very time consuming and resource intensive, and not typically the best way to address the masses. So we're trying to address the masses in partnership with Department of Labor and many others. So we've got a lot going on.
I understand you have a lot going on. It just strikes us, though, that if you only have 27 individuals out of 9,000, we've given you the authority this year to hire over 5,000 individuals. You would think that you should have a larger team dealing with this. In fact, the assistant chief from Beverly Hills strikes me as someone who you should bring in right away to head up this team. But at the least, it strikes me as bureaucratically, criminally negligent that under your leadership, there has not been more devoted to this fraud. If potentially billions of dollars are being stolen from the people of California and from our constituents. Would you agree?
No, I would not.
So you think that at this point you're doing what you need to do when it comes to fraud?
I think we can always do more. Absolutely. I mean, it's been a big drive for us, for particularly the last few months, when we saw a rise in figuring out everything that we can do. So I think we continue to partner with everybody. We continue to reach out. Could we do more? And absolutely. And like I said, we are continuing to hire. It's just a slow process when it comes to police officers or peace officers.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Any other questions from the committee members? Ms. Petrie Norris.
I have one follow-up picking up on new hires. So my colleague from Los Angeles had asked you about the number of new hires that you're currently planning on. And I think, did you say 1,800 new individuals that you're planning to hire?
We have 4,200 that we hired, and we have another 1,000 that are just waiting for their start dates.
Okay. And how many of those are fraud investigators?
No, those were for the UI program, but we handle a lot of the cases administratively. The fraud investigators are just those really for the rings, the criminal rings. But administratively, within our UI program, they're trained to look at the cases, separate, make sure that anybody that's harmed, that their account is good, or close accounts if it's if they figure out it was fraudulently and they've gone through the process and we can tell that that's not the right person. So fraud isn't just isn't resolved at our investigation. It takes a whole branch to address this. So.
Okay. So the strike team report literally says you should stop hiring any new. It says stop hiring any new ones. It is in new employees. So why are you still hiring 1,000 employees?
Because at the time the strike team came out with their report, we had already provided job offers to people. So this is all we're doing is bringing the last of the people on board that we had already provided job offers to.
Okay. And while I can can understand some of that. I think that I would disagree with the assessment of my colleague from San Francisco that in a world of constrained resources, we need to be focusing our constrained resources on solving the top priority issues and problems, and that fraud needs to make its way onto the top of that list rather than just continuing to hire thousands of people who are actually not, who, per the strike team report, it has actually been counterproductive for your department. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? As we discussed earlier, we're taking public comment in person and at this public stations across the state. Please limit your public comment to 1 minute. Any speakers here in the room wishing to make public comment? Okay, I see nobody. How about at our remote locations? Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Isa Marquez. I have been working for the EDD for approximately 5 years, and I'm proud to work for the EDD because I know what it's like to be unemployed, and I care for the values that the EDD stands for. I'm also a proud SIU local member for Local 1000. I want to briefly comment on what it is like to work at the EDD during record levels of unemployment. We have been working tirelessly to ensure California workers get the benefit that they need. We understand that we are a lifeline for many struggling Californians, but we are understaffed and underfunded. While we are blessed to be here working for the EDD, my coworkers and I have been working overtime and on weekends. And I would like to stress that the IT staff are so overwhelmed that it's interfering with my ability to be able to provide services in a timely manner. For instance, it took me over 3 months to be able to get permission just to be able to enter a basic note onto the UI system, and over 2 months just to be able to get access and be able to provide unemployment assistance. I do believe that the solution is to fully fund the EDD and expand the IT staff with actual EDD employees who are here for the long haul, and not just for temporary workers who are not invested in the outcome. Lastly, there are disgruntled claimants who are having an event outside the EDD in Sacramento, and we want to make sure that the people of California know that the EDD workers are working very hard, and that we do care to make sure that we help each and every one of them. And I do thank you for the opportunity today.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your service. I actually had the opportunity to tour an EDD office here in Sacramento yesterday, and that office does UI, and they're working 7 days a week there. So you guys are working hard, so thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of our hearing. I want to thank Genevieve Morlis. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, there's somebody else. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to make comment. I'm Joyce Wheeler Owens, and I am an employment program rep with EDD and have been for 13 years. And what I do here is I investigate and determine eligibility of those who request unemployment assistance. I was here when we got through the 2007-2009 Great Recession, and my coworkers and I stepped up and worked long and hard to help California recover. And with the pandemic, we're stepping up again. As you've heard, we're working 8 to 14 and a half hours a day, 7 days a week. And we are accepting that this is the cost to our homes and families in order to serve California. At the level, when this all started, EDD at all levels were raising the alarm about what we needed, because we've been underfunded, understaffed, and we have outdated technology. It's clear that EDD has never been fully funded at the level it needs, and unfortunately, it took a pandemic to show us what needs to be done. We know that the short level is, quick answers don't make fixes. We need for you to invest in the department, in the staff, and provide us with the things we need in order that we can help California recover. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers in the queue? Mr. Nazarian?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, for holding this event, this meeting today, this hearing today. As we had discussed in the previous hearing about a month ago or 5-6 weeks ago, I don't know, given the election timeline and everything going on, I don't know what the appetite is, but I would ask that we still consider holding these meetings. I think the more we question, the better outcomes we get. So if everyone in the committee is fine with coming back up to Sacramento and to hold a hearing of this nature in the near future, I would request that we do that.
Sure, and that was my idea, to reach out to the members and see if they had the
Fantastic.
appetite for it.
Thank you.
So we'll reach out, and no, you don't got to make a commitment today, but we can definitely do that. And I would like to. Mr. Chu?
One more comment related to this. I just, again, want to thank the rank and file workers of EDD because they are working around the clock. They're working under tremendous challenges. And one thing that has been clear to me during this time period is, from my staff to the public to the press, we have been able to get more accurate information, better ideas, better recommendations of what to do from rank and file staffers than we are hearing from an EDD leadership that has failed consistently. And if you could see the nodding of my colleagues as they agree with what I'm saying, I would like to potentially suggest maybe for the next hearing that we ask for some way to get more direct feedback from EDD rank and file workers, in addition to hearing from EDD leadership about what might be helpful, because I think they would provide a very different perspective from what we're hearing from EDD leadership. Just a suggestion.
Okay, great suggestion. So I really want to thank Genevieve Morelos. She's staffed this committee. She's not leaving the building. She's just going to staff different committees. Obviously, she chaired, helped Mr. Nazarian too when he was the chair, and she works for Mr. Ting. So Genevieve, I know you're at home with Rose, so thank you very much, and look after little Rose. If there's no further questions, that brings our hearing to an end. Thank you.